Today's conversation is for couples who feel tired, disconnected, or quietly wondering, is this just how it ends? And it is also for anyone who wants to understand the brain science behind lasting intimacy, not just the romance myth that we were handed. My guest today is Dr. David Helfand, and he also goes by Dr. H. He's a licensed psychologist specializing in marriage retreats, brain mapping, and neurofeedback. He works primarily with couples standing at the edge of divorce and also helps them understand what actually is happening in their brains before they walk away. You might be surprised to hear this, but most marriages, they really don't fall because of lack of love. They actually fail because unmanaged stress, unresolved trauma, and nervous system that's stuck in survival mode. So, Dr. H, welcome to Rosabel Unscripted. I am really grateful that you're here with us today.
Thank you, Rosabel. I think it's going to be a great conversation.
This is such an important conversation. As I mentioned, you do work with couples who are often at their breaking point. So I want to know from your clinical perspective, what is the biggest misunderstanding that couples have about why their marriage feels so difficult?
The question I get for a lot of couples coming into a marriage retreat is that they are concerned they're just not compatible anymore with their spouse. People feel like they drifted different directions and you're not in sync anymore. You're not compatible. It's too much damage, maybe. And what I usually tell people is that it's not an issue of compatibility for the most part. It's typically an issue of skills. No one is taught how to be married. We're not taught how to deal with our own emotions and our own issues, especially if we have tough childhoods or just get overwhelmed with the stress of work or whatever it might be. And so, let alone then trying to deal with other people's and trying to interface the two of those is a lot. It's really, really complicated. And so, what I usually tell couples I work with is first learn the skills of what goes into a successful marriage. And then you can make a reasonable determination about whether you think you're compatible, whether you want to be with your spouse. And there's some issues of compatibility that sometimes show up. If you want kids and your partner doesn't, that's an issue of compatibility. You want to live in one country, they want the heck out of that country. That's an issue of compatibility. But even different politics, different communication
Religion.
styles, different religions, right? Different worldviews in a lot of different ways. Those are not compatibility issues. It's usually a lack of communication skills, sometimes poor emotional intelligence, empathy, or perspective taking. And then the one that I see that really gets couples in trouble is regulation. Dysregulation is such a killer forget just intimacy, but like wanting to be around the other person in the first place.
Absolutely. And why is it that most people assume that stress equals incompatibility?
Because it feels that way, right? If I'm stressed, it's very easy for my nervous system to think you're the source of my stress, or what we call displacement in psychology, that I get really stressed at work and I can't yell at my boss, but I can, quote unquote, yell at my partner, right? So then you come home and you take out the stress on your kids, your partner, your friends, whatever it might be. It's easy to misattribute where that's coming from. And just like you might have, anyone that has kids, right? You've probably experienced that your kids might be more likely to act out around you, but then they go out and their teachers go, oh my God, they're angels. They go to a friend's house, they're so well behaved. And you're like, wait, which kid are you seeing? And it's because we naturally have a tendency to act out around the people that we feel like it could be safer to do so. And that includes your spouse, unfortunately.
What is it that couples usually grieving what they don't always name? What does that mean?
So people aren't really in touch with the source of their grief and anxiety. And it turns into what I call the 90-10 principle. So 90% of the reason someone has a strong emotional reaction is based in historical context. It's your childhood experiences, your past traumas, past relationships, ethnic or religious upbringing. It's all about the baggage and the past history and context. Only 10% of the reason for a strong emotional reaction then is contemporary. So, for example, if your partner is in a conversation with you and they roll their eyes, rolling your eyes is not a particularly nice thing to do. But if you just get enraged with that, or if you just like leave the room and walk away, there's probably something else going on. Now, maybe one of your parents rolled their eyes. It's usually more subtle than that, though. If you feel when your partner rolls their eyes that you are dismissed, you're unheard, that they don't really care about you at that point, then what's really going on is you're reacting to an interpretation. And that's that 90-10. That's why the history of not feeling loved by my parents or wanted or heard or seen or whatever the right verbiage for you might be. And so in that moment, your partner then just brings up the swell of past traumas or stressors, depending on how severe it might feel for you.
Now, let's talk one of my favorites, and that is brain science. So, when a couple is, let's say, constantly arguing or emotionally disconnected, can you try to explain it? What is actually happening, like neurologically, inside their brain?
Yeah, so I love the question, and it's a complicated answer because it depends on a variety of different considerations, right? So, for someone that had a really difficult childhood and they have trauma, they might be entering this fight or flight response, which, by the way, for your listeners, I'm going to use fight or flight broadly, concisely in that sense, just fight or flight. The full response, though, is fight, flight, freeze, fawn, fib, tend, or befriend. So we can get into the full response. People can look it up online if they want to, but I'm going to say fight or flight just for simplicity here. Everyone's nervous system's only job is to keep you alive. That's all it cares about. Can this organism continue? That's all it cares about. And so the fight or flight system is designed to say, well, there's a threat and we need to respond to that threat and keep you alive. So even your partner who loves you can be perceived as a threat. And so then your nervous system kicks into this gear that's designed to deal with a wild animal who's potentially going to hurt you. Now, if you're looking at a loved one as a wild animal who's about to hurt you, that's not going to be a good conversation, probably. So, understanding the level of threat is important in that case. Also, when you're involved in a fight or flight response, your limbic system hijacks your frontal lobe. And your frontal lobe is where a lot of higher emotional intelligence takes place, executive functioning, a lot of impulse controls in this area. Perspective taking is a little bit higher up, but it involves frontal lobe function as well. And so once that is offline, you literally have no access to it if you're in that state, that fight or flight agitated state. And so that's where a lot of couples therapy, I think, fails because we teach people all these wonderful skills, but if you literally can't access those in the moment where you're dysregulated, there's no chance of success at that point. So there needs to be preventative skills. How do you repair when you make a mistake? Because pretty much every couple makes a misstep at some point. And so looking at the skills on either end of that spectrum is really important as well. Now, to further complicate things, it depends on how well you pay attention. People that have attention issues, people that are sleep deprived, people with substance abuse, people with auditory processing concerns, they might look like they're not paying attention. And that might be felt as personal to you if you're that partner. But in reality, it's not personal. This is just how their brain processes. And there's ways to work with whether it's neurodiversity or whether it's some other cognitive shift that might be imperceptible to the partner. There's ways to work around that where both of you can get in sync with each other. But you have to be able to know and name what's going on and also realize that it is not personal.
Yes, totally. To me, it seems like when a couple comes, perhaps you've probably seen this, when they say, well, we really try the whole communication thing. But I think what I often mean is like they try communicating while their brains were still in that fight or flight response, you know? And so that definitely, I know that from my neuroscience background for sure, the whole role of the amygdala and whatnot. And we talk a
Yeah.
little bit more about that.
Yeah. The other one that this is one of my pet peeves is when people say, well, I'm a great communicator. I'm just a very blunt person. Blunt, usually when you hear the word blunt, it is a euphemism for negative. I don't know anyone that's ever used that term and said, God, you're just so freaking beautiful today, right? Blunt is usually a negative expression. For people that say, I've heard a lot of people say, well, I'm a great communicator because I communicate everything basically. That's not a good communicator, right? That's like saying you're really good at nutrition because you eat everything on the table. That's not really good at nutrition.
So, talking about the fact that, yeah, you actually teach couples that, yes, stress doesn't mean the end of our relationship. How can we try to turn it around in the sense that stress actually can become a pathway to that intimacy instead of that disconnection? Can you tell us how we can do that?
Yeah, great question. So there's a very well researched theory in the field by John and Julie Gottman. I'm sure your listeners, if they know couples work, they know the Gottmans.
Yes.
And they talk about the 5-to-1 ratio. 5-to-1 ratio is generally that for one negative interaction, you need 5 positive interactions to feel good and connected towards your partner. And that's largely because our nervous systems have a negativity bias, which has a lot of evolutionary science behind it. Basically, if you pay attention to things that are negative, you're more likely to survive. So we all have this negativity bias then that skews negative interactions in our relationships. Now, generally speaking, what most people are taught is you should have positive interactions then, right? 5-to-1, you would just want to have more positive interactions. But there's another way to think about the 5-to-1 that I find is really powerful for couples. That a negative or unpleasant emotional interaction has 5 times the potential energy behind it as the positive ones. And when you understand the energy potential, you can then start to make some shifts in the dynamic of the relationship in really meaningful ways. So, for example, let's imagine that you come home from a long day at work and it was pretty good. So you come home, you check in with your partner. How was your day? My day was good. How was your day? Yeah, it was pretty good. You have an iced tea or a mojito. You sit on your back patio, hopefully not in the winter, and life is pretty good, right? That's a great experience, a great 5-to-1. The other side of it, though, is imagine that you had a really tough day and you come home and your partner says, "Hey, Rosabel, how was your day?" And you go, "Oh my God, the internet was out, my computer crashed, like everything that could go wrong possibly went wrong that day." If your partner then can empathize with you, can hold you literally or figuratively, if they can provide some sense of connection, humanity, whatever it is you're needing in that moment, that is so much more powerful than just having that mojito on the back deck. And if it's trauma, if you can talk about what's really going on for you, when you rolled your eyes at me, I was immediately sent back to being 5 years old. And I felt like my mom was dismissing me all over again. And what I needed in that moment was to be heard and seen. A great example of being able to say something that takes a stressful experience and creates really profound, deep intimacy. It takes a lot of skill to do that, though. And again, no one's ever taught even like the basics for relationships. And so there's so much missed opportunity to make that flip.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe it. Trauma is something that it shows up in our lives, in our relationships, whether we like it or not, whether we name it or not, right? And those past wounds do quietly shape how we, in general, when we relate to others, and especially couples, couples are always, hopefully together, right? And so that to me truly affects how they experience that closeness, the conflict, the whole trust and thing. But talking about that, why is it that intimacy can feel threatening when, like, let's say, what does healing look like without that blame?
So, in order to really have healing, you need to expose aspects of the trauma. You don't need to tell your partner every gory detail of that experience in your life, and that's not usually necessary. But they need to be cued into the general scope of what happens and what's going on for you right now. And that requires a profound level of vulnerability. And that's antithetical to a trauma response, right? If part of what you learned is that people can't be trusted, right? Because some people are unsafe. And part of what you're feeling in the moment is that flight or flight response. It feels very antithetical to then be able to say, okay, well, the solution here is for me to be vulnerable. And so whether you're blaming yourself, right? Or whether you're blaming or judging other people, well, no one can handle my trauma or no one can really help me, right? This happened 30 years ago. There's no way that you're going to be able to help me with it. Those things aren't really true. And so what I like to tell my clients that the best disinfectant is sunlight. If you have an old pair of gym shoes that are kind of stinky at the end of the day, you put them out on the sunshine, get some UV rays on it, and it smells a lot better the next time you go to use them. Your emotions work the same way, though, that you have to bring them up and it has to be presented and accepted with sunshine. If you put those gym shoes out on a stormy day, they're going to get a lot worse. And again, the same is true with the emotions as well.
Now, there's another topic that a lot of people avoid, but it does matter, and that is therapy in the nervous system, right? Because it really matters. So, from a neuroscience perspective, how is that stress and trauma are connected to that sexual intimacy or lack of it?
Sex is a very vulnerable experience for people. For me to, I mean, everyone just take a moment and picture your O face. I bet everyone just cringed, right? The face you make at climax is probably something that you don't want any documentation of anywhere in the world. No one looks cool at that point. And it's a very vulnerable experiences. The noise you make, your body makes, just being naked around each other, even being half naked around each other. It's a very, very intimate, vulnerable experience. And if you've had any kind of sexual trauma in the past, and big T or little T traumas, then that adds to the complexity and the vulnerability, right? So in order to engage in a way that's meaningful and have a meaningful sex life, you have to kind of train your nervous system that this person is safe. I can trust them. It has to feel like it's worth it too in the end. But then also all the communication that goes into it as well. A lot of couples find it's awkward to talk about sex. It's awkward to talk about what feels good and what you want and how do I teach my partner what I like. And especially then if you're going into something that's considered kinky. Well, how do I tell my partner that I want to role play? How do I tell them that I want to do some light bondage? How do I
Or
tell them that
even,
I like dirty talk?
I was just gonna say the word dirty, it's something that is
Right.
considered dirty because that's another thing, there's so much taboo around it still.
Right. So I worked with a couple that had one of the partners had Crohn's disease. And so they came in for sex therapy because they had a lot of other issues going on as well, but part of it was sex therapy. And part of what we talked about is that she needs to be able to set a boundary. If even mid act, her body starts to fight her in some way, she needs to be able to pull the plug and say, oh, I need to stop this. I need to go take care of myself. And fortunately, she had a partner that understood that. The issue historically was that she didn't know how to advocate for herself because she felt like her partner would be let down. She was really concerned about what the ramifications of advocating would be. But then you're in this situation where she's not really enjoying it. And he can kind of sense that she's not enjoying it. And then they're just like, okay, we're having sex, but like neither of us are enjoying it. So what's the point here? And then they end up going into a sexless marriage for a period of time.
Have you ever had a client, or do you know any stories of, you always wonder, like, for example, person who have like a colostomy bag. I mean, that could be traumatic when it comes to having that close intimacy. That's pretty vulnerable, I would say.
Oh, absolutely. And yes, I have worked with people with colostomy bags, quadriplegics, people with various
Right.
handicaps or are differently abled, however you want to characterize it. And yes, it depends on your personality. It depends on how you came about that experience in your life, right? If you're born with something, sometimes people adapted a long time ago. If it's something that came later in life, well, what was your sex life before this happened? Did you have a lot of other experiences? So there's a lot of variability in how people experience a change like that. And of course, it also depends on the partner too, right? And not just like taking care of someone with medical considerations, but is your partner someone who they feel like they've always been taking care of people in their lives and they want to be taken care of? So now the idea of being married to someone who now is like a patient of theirs is a really difficult experience for them. And how do you balance empathy with that, but also the reality that, well, you kind of do need to take care of your partner, but you can also be taken care of at the same time. It gets very complicated. And then, of course, how do you deal with the mechanics of it, right? Men that have prostate surgery often have a really different experience if they can get an erection at all, have a very different experience in their sex life. And sometimes penetration is no longer possible. Sometimes an erection is no longer possible, but they can still have a sex life. And it just depends on how you define that now. One of the issues I often find with heterosexual couples is that they tend to define a sex life or sex as vaginal penetration, but that is like one version of a sex life. And if you start to broaden your definition and really look at it from a more of a sensual conceptualization, there's really a lot more available to couples then.
Well, it's such an interesting topic in so many ways. Now, you said you're willing to share clinical stories, of course, with compliance and even touch on your own mental health journey. But I do want to ask you, is there a moment that changed how you view marriage or healing, your personal experience?
Yeah, I mean, there are thousands of moments, I would say. Every time I work with a couple, I feel like there's an experience that resonates with me in a different way, whether it could be something in their intake questionnaire or something in the room. There's lots of experiences. And in my personal life, also as a father, I'm always amazed how resilient kids are. I wish adults had half the resiliency that I see in a lot of children. Like, it's just amazing how they just bounce back from things. And I don't just mean like physical, but like just emotionally. They tend to bounce
Right.
back extraordinarily well. But there was a client that I worked with a while back who had one of the most horrific trauma stories, childhood experiences that I've ever heard. And just, I mean, it was very bad. Imagine being like a POW during your childhood. It was just absolutely horrific. And one of the things that we came to through the course of the treatment is that he was also one of the most empathic people I'd ever met. And I said to him, you're allowed to become the hero of your story. You're allowed to take all of that trauma and all the crap that you went through when you were younger, and you're allowed and you're able to, because I see you doing it, turn that into something that is good in the end. And I still can feel getting choked up just remembering kind of the situation in the room, this couch right behind me. I mean, I just remember sitting there where he was like, no one has ever thought to frame it in that way. And it was really powerful.
Wow. No, the reason why I asked that, because I really think it's, like you said, powerful for people to hear that even experts are humans first. It's
Mm.
like I'm in the medical field too. So I do my best to also educate. A lot of patients come to me and they look at me like I'm up here. I try to find reasons and there are plenty to relate. And they feel so much, their ease up. Oh, yeah, we're humans. We pretty much go through the same thing. That doesn't make us any special. So people get to trust us a lot much better when we do that.
I find it on both sides. I think some people want to see their doctor as just like a thing that serves them, and some people want to connect to them on a human level. And so I usually try to feel that out at the beginning of the retreat. Like, okay, so do you
Yeah.
want personal stories? Do you want to know who I am? Or am I just like a thing that's here to help you? I'm fine either way as long as I know what you're looking for. And I can usually feel that out. I don't ask explicitly because I don't think people would have an answer to it. But you can kind of sense when people are like, listen, you're here to help me and I just want you to help me. And that's it.
Oh, you are totally right. You can sense that, and the conversation kind of guides me. I notice as the conversations begins, and it's to me it happens kind of automatically though. Like I know, and then okay, this is strictly business. But when I sense that I'm open, it's so much nicer. Such a nice conversation, and that doesn't mean that we become friends or they go home. None of that. But at that moment, we just share a very compassionate experience.
And I think that's missing a lot in our culture, actually, too. Somebody told me that New England, so I'm in Vermont, and people tell me that New England is a place where we kind of like put our earbuds in and walk around the halls, and like there's a little bit of a don't bother me vibe. I haven't lived anywhere else but New England for the most part, but I do feel like, just in my experience of other cultures visiting, there are different norms where you walk down the street and it's kind of expected that you might have a conversation or say hi to someone at the coffee shop or whatever. Again, bringing it back to couples, I think sometimes the cultural differences people are brought up in lead to assumptions that are being made that you have to kind of educate your partner if there's a certain expectation you're holding.
That is totally true. Well, you mentioned culture. I lived half of my adult life from Colombia, South America. So, yeah, it's a whole different world. And you are right. And for me, that's very important to relate to people. I'm a people's person. And so I'm always looking for ways to relate. Something personal that I enjoy very much. I also do in clinic. I help with dementia patients with the caregivers, work in neurology, and that helps me a lot. And I'm just
Wow.
happy when I'm able to help them. Yeah.
You're doing good work too. I worked with a couple where one of the spouses, I can't diagnose, I'm not sure of this, but it felt like maybe there's some early dementia signs coming. And that was tough because there's only so much I can do in that space as a couples therapist to fix the situation. It's a whole other ball game when that starts to come into play.
Totally. At the beginning, when you were talking about the frontal lobe and all that, because we deal with that very much and all the changes. So, educating those caregivers. For example, I had a son, maybe 40s, 50s, and he has a father, he's 70s parent. And it's amazing because I'm seeing he doesn't understand, he doesn't have much of a memory. And the son goes and asks him, uh, did you pick up your medicines? Did you do this? Did you do that? And I'm like, okay, he hasn't registered that logic is not there. So that's when I start to feel we definitely need to do much better with educating the families, that they're helping these people for them to understand what they're really dealing with. The whole arguing, why they're repeating, and so on. And the whole changes when it comes to the perception why they're doing this. No, they're not doing that because they want to bother you. This is true. This is a neurological response. Yes.
And what you're talking about is the system. And I think it's one of the reasons I like working with couples is that there's a lot of research now that I've seen about doing kind of individual therapy interventions in a sense with a couple. So, like, for example, I do trauma work with an individual, but with their spouse present. And
Exactly.
bringing the trauma work into the system of the relationship is really powerful. And then I love to see people at the end of the retreat go, so should I be using some of these skills with my kids? And I'm like, yes, thank God you figured that out.
Yes.
It's the way you communicate, empathy, emotional intelligence. Like, yes, this comes into being a parent as well. And that's not the focus of my work when the couple's in front of me, but to see them make those connections is really helpful. And I'm glad to hear that there are medical establishments that are also looking at a systemic perspective, because I think that is relatively new from my personal and professional experiences in the field.
Yeah, totally. Communication is big. But at the same time, what I've been hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, healthy marriages are not just built on that perfect communication style. They're also built again in that whole nervous system safety and the regulation. And so I think when couples, understand what actually creates connection, then that hope, that they perhaps thought it was gone, it can return. So, well, I do want to say this and ask you for those
And
couples.
so what I like to tell people is just go for the B minus. If you're getting a B or a B minus, you're going to be really, really happy. And that is a great goal.
Why are we trying to make this marriage or this relationship, let's say an A plus? Is it for us or is it for somebody out there for watching, let's say now social media and all these things? I agree with what you just said because that means we're authentic, we're genuine, we recognize that we're human, we make mistakes, and life is much better. I think that's why I love having this conversation with you. I'm having my own relationship with my husband. We're not perfect, but at the end of the day, it's actually more enjoyable to be able to say, if
Yeah.
you know what I mean.
And you say, like, who are we doing it for? The one that I hear most frequently is the kids, right? Well, we can't argue around the kids, or we have to stay married because of the kids, or we have to whatever for the kids. Yeah, like the kids play a role, and you should probably try to be respectful around each other and don't talk about your sex life around your kids. I'm sure would be a good general rule. But at the same time, like faking it to
Yeah.
pretend something is not true around your kids is not healthy either. Kids are like sponges. And so they're soaking it in constantly. So if what you're doing is there's a feeling that the two of you aren't really connected because you think you're getting away with faking it, what your kids are learning is that a healthy relationship doesn't have to have chemistry, because what they see is two adults that don't really like each other. They go about their lives and they do their thing. And then they're going to go find relationships that mirror that. So there's a fine line there that's hard to know exactly where you need to fall between being really authentic and working on the marriage, but also insulating the children from it as well. And it's not black and white. You can make an argument in different situations to open that up or
Yeah.
shut it down.
That is very interesting. And culturally, I could tell you so many things. I mean, me growing up and the whole idea of sheltering. In my case, there was not a whole lot of sheltering, especially when you have these families who are in mesh, where you have different dynamics. Let's say you have a family when it's not just mommy and daddy and the kids. Now you have grandma, grandpa, aunts, cousins, a lot of people in one place, right? For sure. For sure that. But I did want to ask you this for those couples that are listening right now. And let's say, what are their three shifts that they can start making today to move forward to a healthier relationship?
Sure. So, one of the questions I often ask couples is, what are you doing that sabotages your marriage? So, for example, if you're trying to have an emotional connection with your partner, but then you don't talk about your emotions, you withhold affection, that's a version of sabotage. So, sabotage can be conscious or unconscious. And so, addressing how you get in the way of your own success is a really helpful step to take because also making those changes, your partner will feel them and it'll encourage them to do something similar. Another tool that I often use is letter writing. Verbal communication by nature requires improvisation. And so if you write out a letter to your partner, whether you physically it to them or you just use it as talking points for yourself, it's really helpful to look at how you communicate. So, if I'm writing out this letter and then I go back and look at it and I go, wow, there's a lot of judgment in here. There's a lot of blaming. There's a lot of you statements. There's a lot of stuff that even without having a PhD, I know is probably not good communication. Then you can correct that. And the nice thing about letter writing is you can give your partner a second or a third draft, which is really helpful. One of the biggest issues that I see is we are all overstimulated to the max in our culture these days. So the next time that you go to the bathroom, don't get on your phone. The next time you're making dinner, don't have the TV in the background. Like, try to monotask. Multitasking is terrible for your nervous system. So, try to simplify, right? If you're going to eat a really nice meal, don't eat in front of the TV. Put on some classical music or sit on the back porch and look at the nature while you eat that like fancy steak you prepared or whatever delicious food you just created. Just
Yeah.
eat it and really be involved in the sensory experience. So, those are three things I think people could do immediately that would have a profound difference.
Mindfulness. So, is there anything I have not asked you that you're like, I really need to get that out there? I really want people to know this.
There's so many things we could cover, right? It's hard to cover everything in an hour or 2 hour
You
conversation.
can always come
Um,
back. You're welcome to come back. We can do part
yeah,
two, three, and four.
if people want to put in comments or submit them to you about what questions we didn't get to, I'd be happy to come back and answer whatever your audience is still curious about. I mean, I think there's a few things here that the people that I work with tend to be in a very helpless and hopeless place. And I think there's a few considerations that sometimes can make people feel better. And so, first of all, again, no one is taught how to be married. So if you feel like you're struggling, you're in good company there, right? A lot of people know that the divorce rate is about 50%. What a lot of people are not aware of is that in addition to that, 30% of marriages, at least one spouse is unhappy. So the reality is only 20% of marriages actually have two mutually satisfied, fulfilled, happy individuals. And again, I come back to that's because we're never taught how to do it. In about 40% of divorce cases, one or both spouses report they regret the decision later. And this I find is usually because they're making the decision for divorce for the wrong reasons. The couples that I work with that are facing divorce, probably what's going on is you're feeling a lot of pain and the status quo is not sustainable and you just don't know how to fix it. And I get that because once again, no one's ever taught these skills. So my recommendation for people struggling out there is whether they work with a retreat therapist like me or whether you take on some options and work on regulation and work on your communication and just try to figure it out, just do something because there's usually something that can be done to fix the relationship and the situation. Now, of course, sometimes people aren't compatible or the trauma is just so strong that you feel like this marriage can't last. And that's okay to have that be your decision once you know you're not going to have any regrets.
Right. And there are some other cases for divorce, such as domestic abuse, and those are other because there's
Of
everything
course, if there's
within the
safety
spectrum.
issues. Of
Exactly.
course. Of course.
But I just want to say for everyone out there listening, if this conversation stirs something in you, I want you to hear this clearly. Stress doesn't mean that your relationship is failing. It means that your nervous system is asking for support, understanding, and safety. Dr. H here, he just said it. No one taught us the science of marriage. I mean, there's not like a manual out there. And we also don't know much about how trauma can live in the body and how intimacy begins pretty much in the brain. So by learning changes anything, by learning yourself, your own psychology, your own physiology, it actually changes the outcomes. And healing truly does begin when we stop seeing each other as the enemy. So I want to ask you, Dr. H, how can people get in touch with you?
Sure. So first of all, that was very well said, Rosabel. I can tell that you really take all this information to heart. And if I was ever in your area and needed care, I hope I'm at your hospital or center.
Thank you.
Hopefully not the dementia center. So for anyone interested in working with me, they can check out marriagequest.org. There's a lot of information. If you're not at the point where you want professional help, there's a blog. You get a lot of free info. There's a downloadable document there for like 12 tips on immediately working on the 4 pillars of your marriage: communication, regulation, prioritization, and intimacy. If you are thinking that it's time for some professional help, I always offer a free consultation to anyone that is interested in working with me to make sure that it's really a good fit, because I want to be confident that I can help before you come out and see me. And generally, it's good for me to speak to both partners. So whether you have separate consults or a joint one, then I'd love to just see how I can help.
Perfect. And they can also find you on social media as well, right?
To be honest with you, for my own mental health, I'm not on social media that much. So I do have a LinkedIn account if people want to check out Dr. David Helfand. But I made the decision that for me, I think the website and a little bit of social really is what is most meaningful to me.
And I'll put a link, but listen, everybody out there, please take care of yourselves, And then thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening bravely and for staying open to growth. That is so, so important. Thank you, Dr. H. You're welcome to come back anytime. This is Rosabel Unscripted with Courage Meets Healing. Thank you, everybody.